It's a sliding car. You can slide it through the bends.
But once it's up on its toes, it's absolutely brilliant.
It gets a bit wild around corners, but you just have to take care.
It's not a thing of beauty.
It's very much British, understated.
And I think I'll call it the cucumber.
Everyone thinks that there must have been two people, a Mr. Aston and Mr. Martin. There wasn't. There was Lionel Martin, and there's a place called Aston Clinton, which was a hill climb just outside Aylesbury. And that's how Aston Martin came together. It was then taken over by a man called Bertelli. It was Bertelli who put the mark on the map. His great successes were in the 1.5 litre class at Le Mans. This went on until the company was acquired by a man called Gordon Sutherland. But Sutherland found himself, as so many people do who try to make cars, in trouble financially. He was looking for a buyer. He found one. He found one in the shape of David Brown, the tractor manufacturer from Huddersfield. David Brown took over the company following an advertisement in the Times newspaper, and the rest is history.
Before the war, Aston were fairly shamelessly marketing as racing cars, as sports cars. And after the war, they were really the first of the supercars. They had to market both for the racing pedigree, but also for the new, wealthy luxury market. So you get strange things happening, like, for example, the first brochure produced for what's now known as the DB1. On the cover of that, there is an elegant blue car set in front of a country house, and inside are a series of shots of pre-war and post-war racing successes. So they were mixing the two elements.
This car is a DB2 Aston Martin. It was built in 1950 as one of 3 team cars to race at Le Mans in the 24-hour race there. I know it's a team car because I drove it at Le Mans in 1950. When David Brown decided to go racing, he very wisely decided he had to have a racing manager, and he recruited John Wire for this purpose. And John was very meticulous. He had great mechanical training, and he had a mind like a calculator. He had incredible ability with stopwatches, which you press little buttons, and he could time probably about 6 or 8 cars at the same time, and he would remember everything. He was a disciplinarian. He had a wicked sense of humour. He was known as Death Ray. If you did anything wrong, he would look at you and you would quiver. But he controlled people like Salvadori and Moss and Collins and all the other hooligans of the day. I was a marine insurance worker working in the city, and I was selected by John Wire, who was the team manager. He was the only amateur really in the team. And I would leave my office desk at, say, midday on Wednesday, fly from Croydon in David Brown's Dove to Le Mans, take my jacket off. I'd left my bowler hat and umbrella behind, and then literally one would tuck one's trousers into one's socks and go motor racing. The start of the race course, one used to run across the road, drop the flag, jump in and start. And the initial movement away from the line, because you had to pull, it's very heavy. But once the car gets going, it's up on its toes and it's absolutely brilliant. The DB2 is the most forgiving car. The top speed of this was about 130. It didn't have the power of the Jaguars, who left us behind on the straights, but we could catch them on the corners. And if you did get into trouble, you just took your hands off the wheel, said a little prayer, the car would straighten itself out and carry on. You can differentiate between the works cars by the coloured grills, which were done for recognition purposes. Red for the number 1 car, blue for number 2 and yellow for number 3. And there's a recognition light so at night time the pit crew could see you going past. People usually hear the car coming probably more than, because it has a rather lovely exhaust note. People find it very unusual, and of course they love the shape.
The DB2 had the county versus the racing element, and you get that in two contrasting adverts, one which shows the racing car and actually shows the racing successes. Another rather delightful one shows a Miss June Burt with a fur hat and a fur collar learning to drive an Aston Martin with one of the racing team. And clearly if they were going to be successful, they'd got to persuade the Miss June Burts as well as the racing drivers to actually buy their products.
It was very clear to Sir David Brown that if he was going to compete on the racetracks and if he was going to compete in the marketplace, then he'd got to start winning races, and the DB2 wasn't going to do it. He reached a point where there was a division to be made between a sports racing car and a road car. And he therefore went about designing a sports racing car, the Aston Martin DB3.
First enthusiasm for Astons, I think, was when I was at school. You know, you were sort of in the woodwork lesson, supposed to be doing your woodwork, and in fact you were probably reading car magazines. And of course Aston were winning races then with the DB3S. They basically built a number of production cars, in addition to which they did 11 team specification cars. This is the last in 1957. They were a higher specification, the production cars, with twin plug heads and needle roller gearboxes and all kinds of gizmos. Well, needless to say, it's a lovely car to drive. In its day, they weren't the most powerful cars and still aren't. They don't have the power, for example, of the Jaguar D-types, which were their main rivals in the day. This one produces about 230, 240 brake horsepower. So it's not that powerful, and it weighs 1,000 kilograms as a metric ton, so it's not that light. But what it does have is very, very good handling. It's excellent. Aston's have got a lovely exhaust note. All Astons have got a lovely exhaust note. That's one of the things that sets them apart. It's a sliding car. You can slide it through the bends. Of course, modern cars, they're all grip. And if you were to put if you could find modern tyres to fit this that had more grip, the car wouldn't handle half so well. Interestingly, we did an event in Italy, the Coppadora Dolomiti, which was almost 100% Italian in cars and competitors. To our great pleasure, the car was voted the most beautiful car of the event. There's a little old lady came up to me the other day and said to me, "What a beautiful car." She said, "I've got an idea." She said, "I'll look after it and clean it, and you can drive it," which I thought was quite a bargain, really. As she walked off, she said, "I and I think I'll call it the Cucumber, which I thought was really sweet. I'm told that you can always tell a Ferrari owner by his Gucci shoes and white slacks, and you can tell an Aston owner by the grease under his fingernails. It's not strictly true.
By 1955, the DB3S was getting on a bit in gas. We'd seen it first in 53, but 55 proved to be a good season. There was a second at Le Mans for Peter Collins and Paul Frere. They dominated the Goodwood 9-hour race. They won it again.
Lap after lap, hour after hour, the race goes on. But fatigue and cold forgotten, the pit crews swing into action as Shelby brings the Aston in. And the news is signalled. Astons are first and second. With the opposition annihilated, winner pulls in to be submerged beneath a seething mass, eager to acclaim a resounding victory.
Well, all this racing had been going on in the 50s, keeping the name of Aston Martin in the eyes of every schoolboy of the time. On the road, Aston finished up with a new car, and this was the car that they were aiming to sell in greater numbers than ever before, the DB4.
Arguing the later DBs is again the county versus racing brigade, but it's even more critical that they're selling to the wealthy county people. And as a result, in a DB4 brochure, for example, which is a very prestige item, clearly dealing with a supercar, you have at the beginning line drawings of racing successes, but at the end of the brochure you have shots of golf clubs and fitted luggage and a lady and gentleman in designer suits setting off for a weekend in a country house. And these were precisely the kind of people they'd got to entice into buying their car if they were going to be successful.
The 4 evolved into the 5 with the rounded front headlights, and it was more of a Grand Tourer car with slightly more space inside rather than an out-and-out sports car. Aston Martin were approached back in 1963 when Young Productions were making Goldfinger, and we were asked to use a DB5. Of course, the car was new at that time, and it was tremendous publicity for Aston Martin, and the film really took off, and you know, Connery is much loved, and everybody associates Aston Martin with the silver DB5 out of that film. It was manufactured in 1965, and it being one of the last of around 800 made. I bought the car in 1990. It was a very nice looking car when I purchased it, but I then found out when it went in for a service that the engine had got a main bearing problem, and the chassis was very rotten, so it came as a bit of a shock, and I then realised it would need a complete rebuild. The original colour was red, but I've always wanted a car that was identical to the original James Bond car. So that meant having it resprayed the same metallic silver and having the black leather interior put in. It's so evocative of the 60s. It's a combination of the Italian style and yet British engineering. And there's certain aspects of the car I particularly like. Obviously the Aston Martin grille is so well known. And things like the side air vents are very distinctive to Aston Martins of that period. drive it, it's great fun. It's a slightly heavier car than equivalent Ferrari. The 4-litre engine is a very strong engine, produces plenty of horsepower, so in a straight line it really is great fun to drive. It gets a bit wild around corners, but you just have to take care.
"1967 saw the introduction of the last David Brown Aston Martin. This was the DBS, first in 6-cylinder form and then in V8 form. But sadly it coincided with the Middle East oil crisis, and with profits falling, Brown found himself unable to support Aston Martin through more lean periods. Brown sold the company, so the David Brown line came to an end. There were a number of owners, but none significant until we get to the days of another British entrepreneur, Victor Gauntlet, aided and abetted by the Greek-American Peter Lovanus. It was they who took Aston Martin by the scruff of the neck and rebuilt the company.
The V8 was launched in 1969, and the Zagato is the last of that era of cars. All cars were sold prior to the first one being built. Potential customers were shown a clay model of the car. They weren't, in fact, even told the exact price because it wasn't known, but all 50 cars were sold. The bodywork on the car was designed by Zagato, a very famous Italian coach builder. One of the criticisms of the car from people that originally ordered it, because people ordered the car new before the final design shape was achieved. And one of the criticisms was the hump in the bonnet. Various options were tried, but it was thought that this power bulge was the only real way of achieving enough underbonnet clearance. It's there to clear the airbox for the carburetors. It's not a thing of beauty, but it's there. It's there for a reason. To many people, the shape of the current Zagato isn't beautiful, and sometimes I agree with them. There are certain angles when I look at it and I think, oh, no, but then there are other angles which I love. But I tend to forget about all of those when I'm driving it, because the pleasure is the driving. When the Zagato was launched, it achieved 180 miles an hour. There's no reason to think it won't today. It's a quick car. The greatest driving pleasure is on open roads, driving it not to its limit, because we'd get locked up if we do that, but driving it as quickly as one safely and reasonably can. The Zagato is the only Aston I've ever bought new, and I bought it because it was the end of an era, the big engined era. I bought it because it's light, it's quick, and it's the greatest Aston there is to drive. There aren't many supercars that aren't dramatic, and this is one. It's an easy car to drive. It's much less dramatic than a Ferrari or a Lamborghini with wailing engines. It's a simple, easy car to drive, but gives the same pleasure as some of these things that look twice as fast.
They are, of course, supercars marketed for their speed and performance, but in the brochures you don't get them going to Monte Carlo or being photographed against racing backgrounds. You get, in the recent Virage brochure, for example, a shot of a car surrounded by hounds and men in red coats, obviously on a hunting expedition. And this was very much to set the Aston Martin still as part of the English country tradition.
Aston were definitely on the upper game, and the Ford Motor Company were interested in specialist manufacturers. They acquired first part and then the whole of Aston Martin.
Currently Astons are producing in the large engine cars the V8 Coupe and the Vantage. They also produce a more affordable Aston, a half-price Aston at £80,000, which is the DB7. And they produce that in much larger numbers. We're talking of 3 or 4 cars a week with the big engine cars and 10 or 12 with the DB7.
If I won the lottery, I would certainly buy an Aston Martin DB7 because it embodies all the characteristics of the DB2, same glorious shape, but incorporating, of course, all the modern technology, and it would be a most superb grand touring car.
Aston Martin to me means, you know, excellence of quality of engineering. I think they sometimes haven't got the flair that some of the Italian makes might have, but it's very much British, understated, but a real true quality.
One thing that is definable in Astons always is the grille. It's got that classic scalloped grille, which has been carried through to the present day Aston. It still has that distinctive identity to the grille. Anyone that sees that and knows anything about Astons will identify a new Aston straight away. It is the epitome of the English sports car. I know Jaguar won't like me for saying that, but they are. People say that there's no sound like a Ferrari. Well, I can tell you that there's no sound like a lovely Aston as well.